Hey guys, today we're going to talk about mareva injunctions. What is a mareva injunction? A mareva injunction is a court order freezes the assets of the defendant to prevent him from dissipating or disposing of his assets while a lawsuit is pending, because the defendant is afraid that he will lose a lawsuit, and then so the plaintiff does not want him to dispose of his assets, and at the end of the lawsuit he's left with just a paper judgment but no assets to seize, no assets to confiscate and auction off. Because as you know, as you have watched from my earlier videos, even if you win a lawsuit, money does not drop from the sky. The court does not give you the amount of damages. You actually have to enforce it either by writ of seizure and sale or by garnishee order. Garnishee order is to freeze money at bank. So what a mareva injunction does is to stop the defendant from moving away his assets, selling his assets, or even moving the assets out of the country, to frustrate the plaintiff, who would then be left with an empty paper judgment. A mareva injunction can be domestic, which means limited to Singapore, the assets in Singapore, or it could be worldwide, which means it covers all the assets of the defendant worldwide. How do you apply for a mareva injunction? Well, you have to do a summons, which is essentially a court application. A summons supported by an affidavit, that means a sworn statement of facts, giving reasons why you think that the defendant will dispose of his assets. The court order for a worldwide mareva injunction has to be in Form 6A of the practice directions, and the court order for a local, a domestic mareva injunction has to be in Form 6B. To obtain a mareva injunction, the plaintiff must show to the court that he has a good arguable case against the defendant, and that defendant has assets within the jurisdiction, and there is a real risk of dissipation of assets from the jurisdiction, which would render the judgment obtained after the lawsuits of no effect. That means just a paper judgment. There's no assets to seize. In the case of J Trust Asia Private Limited and Group Lease Holdings Private Limited, the court defined what is a good and arguable case. A good and arguable case is one which is more than barely capable of serious argument, but not necessarily one which the judge considers would have a better than 50% chance of success. In the case of Bouvier, the court held that the plaintiff must show that there is a real risk that the defendant will dissipate his assets to frustrate the enforcement of an anticipated court judgment. And this requires the production of solid evidence. You need solid evidence to show to the court, to demonstrate the risk, and not just bare assertions to the effect. In other words, you cannot, in the supporting affidavit for the summons for mareva injunction, you cannot just make bare assertions saying that, oh, he's going to close his bank account and transfer the money overseas. Oh, there's a possibility he will sell his car, his condo, his whatever, his factory, his jewelry and all that. You need solid evidence. For example, you can show to the court that in the middle of the lawsuit, he put up his house for sale, or there were transfers of money, huge transfers of money if you manage to get his bank records. Also, a well-substantiated allegation that a defendant had acted dishonestly could and often would be relevant to whether there was a real risk that the defendant will dissipate his assets. The court will therefore examine the precise nature of the dishonesty alleged and the strength of the evidence relied on in support of the allegation. So if the lawsuit involves fraud or some kind of dishonest behavior, the court will examine the nature of the dishonest behavior in weighing whether or not to grant the mareva injunction. The factors which the court generally considers relevant in assessing whether there's a real risk of dissipation of assets will include the nature of the assets which are to be the subject of the injunction, the ease of disposal, how easy it is to sell it. It's easier to sell a car than a condominium. The nature and financial standing of the defendant's business, the defendant's domicile or residence. Domicile means the place that a person calls home. So for example, if a person lives in Singapore for 1 week, 2 weeks a year, the court will give greater weight, okay, when considering whether he would dissipate his assets. Another factor would be intentions expressed by the defendant about future dealings with his local or overseas assets, connections between the defendant and the companies which have defaulted on awards or judgments, the behavior of the defendant in respect of other claims, other judgments, whether he has paid the other judgments, or if there are other judgments against him, has he dissipated his assets in respect of the other judgments. The principles I just talked about apply to worldwide mareva injunctions also, except that for worldwide mareva injunctions, the plaintiff will have to show that there are no assets or insufficient assets within Singapore to satisfy the damages, the claim, and there are assets outside the jurisdiction. So for example, if the plaintiff knows that the defendant has bank accounts in Hong Kong, London, containing millions of dollars, okay, but he only has one bank in Singapore with $10,000 inside, this would be a consideration taken by the court when considering a worldwide mareva injunction. Even if the plaintiff has made out a good arguable case and a risk of dissipation, the court has a power to refuse to grant a mareva injunction on the grounds that the mareva injunction is used for a collateral purpose. That means for a secondary, ancillary, for other purposes. For example, where there is some impropriety in the plaintiff's motive for seeking the mareva injunction, which justifies the denial of the relief sought. This is based on principles of abuse of process. What's the cost of a mareva injunction? Well, it's a very tedious process. You have to have a summons, affidavit, half-day hearing, and then there are a lot of court forms, court orders to be populated. You have to serve it to the different people. The cost for mareva injunction can cost between anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000, 25,000. You have to check with your lawyer whether he is able to cap his fees or whether he charges by the hour, or give an estimate on the cost of the mareva injunction. So thanks for watching this video on mareva injunctions.